And that's it. So yeah, will be the Q&A. We will be collecting the questions throughout the session, and we'll then be reading those questions out to Alison and Phil and Sarah at the end. So I think without further ado, I will now pass over to Alison. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and you should all now be able to see Alison.
All right, so thank you all so much for joining. It's really cool seeing people from all over the Americas today. So personally, I'm from the USA, if you didn't notice from my little intro there. And I am a postgraduate at the LSE studying organizational behavior, which is part of their Department of Management. So as for why I ended up at the LSE, I've kind of had a very diverse career background. So I pursued my undergraduate degree in economics in New York City at Columbia University. And while I was there, I really tried out a lot of different industries. I had internships in the pharmaceutical industry, in academia. I did some research. I worked at the library. So I really just did a wide variety of things. And I was kind of introduced to organizational behavior while pursuing my undergraduate degree. As an undergraduate, I had to write a thesis, and for my thesis, I decided to study Japan and the economic outcomes that came from the way that their automobile manufacturing firms were organized in the 1980s. And even though I was studying economics, the thing that really interested me was looking at how the way that organizations are structured can lead to broader economic outcomes. So after that, I kind of knew in the back of my head that I had an interest in organizational behavior and development, but I didn't pursue it initially when I graduated. So I first interned at JP Morgan when I was a junior in university. So I had a summer internship there that turned into a full-time role. And while I was at JP Morgan, I rotated on 4 teams. So I worked in cybersecurity, fintech, in social good, and in their sort of risk and control in their internal think tank. So I really got to see a lot of different sides of the bank. And what really interested me about the way that things ran there was just how global everything was. I was never on a team that was only based in one country. I was constantly working with people from different places. And it really showed me just how global the modern workplace is and how important it is to be able to build relationships with and understand people from different cultures. I immediately noticed that there were some communication challenges that people faced and almost a sort of preference for certain time zones. And it really interested me in finding a better way of running a company in a way that enables global teams to run more efficiently in a way that's fair to everyone. So I enjoyed my experience at JP Morgan, but after that wanted a little bit more client-facing experience. So after that, I worked at a global technology company called the Trade Desk, where I was a programmatic trader. Essentially, that means I did the data analytics behind diaper ads. I had other clients as well, but I spent a lot of time with Procter & Gamble, which was my main client there. So in that role, I was able to look at a smaller company, but I saw some of the same challenges that I'd seen at JP Morgan in terms of just scaling globally and adapting the culture to sort of fit the reality of who was working in the company. So there was definitely a similar challenge there of just figuring out how to create a culture that was inclusive and that accounted for how quickly everything was scaling and expanding globally. So at the Trade Desk, I realized that I was less interested in pursuing a quantitative career and wanted to shift more towards the people side of things. And that stemmed both from my interest in organizational behavior and from some of the interactions I'd had with the people team. I was privileged to be able to see how they were strategizing and how they were developing as an organization. And I thought I would really like to do things better and sort of be able to do this kind of work myself because I have so many ideas. So after that, I decided I needed to pursue organizational behavior more seriously. But I decided on the London School of Economics because as I said before, I noticed how important it was to have a global perspective. So I'd only ever studied in the United States. To be honest, I'd never spent more than 2 weeks outside of the country or around the close radius of my hometown. So it was a big leap going from living in such a small world to moving to the UK for me. But what really appealed to me about the London School of Economics wasn't just that it was in the UK, but also that it was such an international and global student population. And I thought it would give me a really good opportunity to learn how to build relationships with and communicate with people from all over the world. So the full name of my program is Human Resources Management and Organizations, and I am in a stream that's called Organizational Behavior. So that stream really focuses on looking at how organizations adapt and change, how to sort of shape organizational cultures, how to study and assess cultures, and also looks at things like team dynamics, leadership, and other components of organizations. And I think it's given me a really interesting and global perspective on the way that organizations work. And I think most importantly, the UK and London in particular is such a diverse place. Coming from New York, it was certainly a diverse place, but I think most people I met were American. Even in my university, which was a very international university compared to other American schools, the vast majority of people who I interacted with on a day-to-day basis were still American. So I hadn't really ever gone outside of my comfort zone in terms of really meeting and building relationships with a lot of people from different places. So moving to London definitely was a bit of a culture shock in a good way. So my program alone has students from over 43 countries, and I think that's representative of a lot of other programs at the London School of Economics as well. And I can say, just from having visited some other universities and speaking to friends who've gone to other schools, that that is an incredibly unique student body, and you won't find a lot of other opportunities like that to just study with and meet people from so many different places. So yeah, I've been really enjoying my experience so far. The London School of Economics is, as I'm sure you know, one of the premier institutions in the world. So some of the faculty there are just absolute rock stars in their fields, and it's great to be able to meet so many passionate and successful people. There's also so many opportunities to go to different events and panels where you get to meet people from all different fields, and you really get to explore your interests. I think for me, moving to the UK was less the focus as much as moving to London in particular. Coming from New York City, I really couldn't see myself in a small college town. So moving to London was definitely appealing for me. And I'm so glad that I'm here. Even though the world is a little bit crazy right now, it's been great to be able to experience living in another big city. And even though there's certainly similarities between London and New York, they are at their core very, very different cities. And it's challenged me in a lot of ways, and I think has helped me really grow and will be very applicable when I move on to my next job, whether that be in London, New York, or anywhere else. So that's what I've got in terms of an introduction. And if anyone has any questions, just feel free to ask them.
Super, thank you so much. Oh, so we've already got our first question through. So Maritza asks, would you like to have your own startup company or business? And well, actually, she's got two questions. I think that will be the first question, and then there's a follow-up.
Yeah, so actually I would like to eventually start a business or a consultancy someday. I think right now the priority is getting a little bit more experience in my field and working with people who are more experienced. But a few years down the line, once I have that experience, I've had a few ideas come up. And one of the things that's so great about London is that when I've had ideas, there have been so many different people and industries who I've been able to talk to. So I had one idea that was sort of in the ad tech space that I thought could make an interesting company idea. And I was very easily able to meet tons of people in that space who were happy to talk to me. So that's just one of the great things about London, is just there's so many successful people in so many different fields here that you can access. And LSE is a great launching point to help you meet those people and make those connections. So yeah, in short, yes, I would like to maybe someday have my own company, but I think I'd like to start building up my experience and knowledge base first.
Fabulous. Excellent. And then she asked another question, which is, what is your favorite area in business?
Ooh, so I think it depends really on the company because every company has so many different cultures and different teams. Um, in terms of places I've worked already, I think my favorite area so far has been the technology space. So I really enjoyed working in fintech and in cybersecurity. Cybersecurity in particular was a really, really interesting field. And I think just points to my interest in being in an area of business that's more innovative and constantly adapting and changing. So I'm very interested in technology in general, but cybersecurity was really, really interesting.
Fantastic. And I can see we've got another question through as well. This is great. Please do keep your questions coming, everybody. So the question is, what's your experience on the big differences of education in the UK and the US?
Yeah, that's a great question and something that I really wasn't prepared for when I moved here. So one of the big differences is simply assessment. I went to a unique school that was a liberal arts college, so assessment was very much focused on participation in class, building relationships with your professors, sort of showing that you cared and showing how you were interpreting the information yourself. In the UK, I found that assessment is much more based on showing that you know the facts, very much more exam focused in terms of assessment. And you certainly have access to professors and can build those relationships, but I think it's less a part of, you know, your grade and more just a self-motivated thing if that's what you want to do. It's also, I've found, I think because there's so many different people from different cultures in my classes, participation has been interesting because you can see firsthand how people from some places are much more participative than others. Whereas in the US, since most students were American, everyone was always, you know, talking over one another. So that's been an interesting experience as well. But I think assessment is probably the biggest difference that I've noticed.
Super. And actually that answer leads on very nicely to the next question that's come through from Walter, which says, what do you consider the most challenging part of working with people from different nationalities and cultural backgrounds?
Well, I think one of them is simply communication styles. One thing that we actually learned about recently in one of my courses is there's this man Hofstede, which his work is a little bit controversial, but he talks about how national culture influences organizational culture. And he talks sort of about high context or low context communication. So high context communication is basically where you give a lot of context, you go into a lot of detail, you try to help the person understand as much as possible, and you're not afraid to say too many words because it's all about giving them a really holistic picture. So countries like India and France are very high context in the way that they communicate. Whereas countries like Germany and the US are very low context, which means that they're very direct. They will use as few words, as few letters as possible to get the message across. And I've even noticed that in my own work experience, just interacting with colleagues from different places. My colleagues in the US won't even use full sentences, just the fewest letters and words as possible to get the point across. Whereas people I've worked with in India have been much more, I guess, what's the word, detailed in terms of the way that they communicate. And they're not afraid to take the time to do that. So I think that's been really challenging, is just being able to take those different communication styles and find a way to make a team run efficiently, even though everyone has very different ways of sharing their ideas. And I found that in school as well, working on group projects, that it's similar. People just have very different approaches to work based on that communication style.
Brilliant. Great answer. Hopefully that answered your question, Walter. So we've still got more questions coming in. Ines asks, how do you involve research with other people or institutes? So she's actually studying a PhD in business management, and in the future she would like to do research with other institutes and researchers.
So I think a lot of it is just looking for the opportunities. Thankfully, I think LSE has given me access to a lot of different institutions, which has helped with my research. However, if you want to get involved in research with, I guess, I'm trying to sort of understand the question. So when you talk about research with other people or institutes, I'm guessing that you mean sort of going outside of where you are and maybe going into a company and doing research, or speaking to someone who is unrelated to the institution that you're at. And I think a lot of that is just building your network, which I know is kind of a cop-out answer, but if you want to be able to access different institutions, I think it's important to sort of meet a person who can be your connection to that institution. And it's something that is a challenge for a lot of people. I know that I have classmates who wanted to study certain businesses for their dissertations but didn't have the access that they needed. But for those of my friends who are able to go into companies and really study them and research them, and institutions outside of LSE, the common thread is that they all have some kind of connection into that company, whether that be just a person that they know through networking or whether they've worked there themselves. So I think just building your network and getting involved as much as possible outside of LSE will be helpful in terms of giving you access to other institutions.
Super. And actually, I just wondered if you might have any tips for people to, how would you go about expanding your network beyond your institution?
Yeah, so really pay attention to the different events that LSE puts on, because they really have a lot of opportunities to meet people in different companies and industries. I know that when you're bogged down with schoolwork, it can be hard to think ahead, but definitely take advantage of those resources. Another thing that I would say is just you look at different London-based sort of blogs and websites where they talk about different events, or look at meetup.com is a great resource. Just going to things like that so that you can sort of go outside of your LSE bubble is really helpful as well. And also one thing that's been helpful for me, which I know maybe sounds weird, is just starting conversations with people, just in a coffee shop, on the bus, wherever. I think if you put out good energy and you aren't afraid to sort of talk to people, then you would be surprised how many interesting people you can meet.
Fantastic, thanks. And so next question is from Amanda. So she's asking, how has your experience at LSE helped you to have a prominent place within the job market in England? I mean, she's asking specifically about England, but I think it might be interesting, beyond, are you considering going back to the US? How do you feel like it's shifted your position in the job market?
Yeah, I think one thing that it's definitely done is it's definitely made me a more attractive candidate. I'm just comparing my experience graduating in New York versus graduating in London and going to different schools and having different opportunities. I think LSE has a really great sort of career network, and they also have career advisors who will work one-on-one with you. I think in terms of positioning you in the job market in England, it is an interesting time to be in England with Brexit happening, because I think there's a little bit more uncertainty than there has been in previous years, which is why I'm looking at jobs both in England and in the US, just keeping my mind open about opportunities. But LSE has a really good name in the UK. And when I bring it up, people are always interested and want to learn more about it. And there's also pretty much every big company that you can think of is looking for students and having recruitment events at LSE. So once again, I think a lot of it is just taking advantage of the resources that LSE offers, because they have all kinds of career events that you can go to, and you can meet people from every company that you can think of.
Fantastic. So we've not got any more questions in yet. Please don't be shy. We've got quite a lot of time. We've got at least half an hour longer with Allison, so please don't be shy and ask your questions. And I also would like to take this opportunity to say that we've also got on the line Phil and Sarah from LSE. So if you've also got questions about admissions, about any of the process in terms of applying to LSE, getting in, student support, entry requirements, they are also on the line. to answer those questions. I can see now that another question has come in. Question from Tatiana, who asks, once you've been able to create a good network of contacts, what do you think is the best way to maintain those relationships through time? Great question, Tatiana.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think people tend to be a little bit shy about coming across as needy or annoying or, not wanting to pester too much. But I think it is really important to stay in touch with people once you've met them and just make time for it in your day. So if you allot time every week to get coffees with people and just make sure that you're continually reaching out, it can be really helpful in terms of just building a relationship where maintaining contact just feels more natural. And that can also be just emailing them to ask questions about career issues or school related things. But I think it's really important to sort of have like face-to-face conversations on a regular basis as much as you can. And if they're not face-to-face, just making sure that there's kind of a dialogue going on instead of just kind of very periodically sending them an email to remind them that they exist. You want to show that you're interested in what they're doing, but you also want to make sure that, they know what's going on with you and that you have that relationship. And I think another part of it is, sorry, I had something in mind that completely skipped my mind, but I'm sure it'll pop up later.
No worries. And so just while we're waiting for other questions, already another question came in just as I was saying that. So Frida asks, what kind of impact do you believe that internal marketing can have regarding organizational behavior? Great question, Frida.
Yeah, so just to clarify, since I've never worked in marketing, by internal marketing, do you sort of mean companies from within trying to market to their own employees and trying to sort of almost communicate to their employees what their culture is and promote things internally? That's sort of what I am getting out of your question. But if I'm wrong, just let me know. I think that companies can really make an effort to communicate their values to their employees. With organizational behavior, the values are just one part of what makes an organization run the way that it does. It's important that you have the values in place for sure, and that you market what your company's ethics are and what is important, but you also have to have sort of norms and behaviors in your employee population that reflects those values. So I think internal marketing can do a great job of communicating aspirationally what a company wants to be. But I think in addition to that, it's important that the employees live by those values. So internal marketing, I think, is a great step in the right direction for shaping organizational behavior. But I think it's just the first step in sort of shifting things through norms, values, behaviors, etc.
Super. And so you mentioned that internal marketing or internal communications is that first step. What would you say would be the kind of the most critical in your experience, in your research? What might you say is the most critical thing an organization could do to shift their behavior?
Yeah,
or the organizational behavior?
That's a great question. I think one of the things that would be really important is making sure that the people at the top are, like the leadership, are reflecting the values that they want the employees to follow. It's important that the leaders of a company set a good example and show what's important. But I think the other part of it is that in terms so definitely the leaders should set a good example, but I think it's also important that employees feel like they have a voice. I think that's really important because if employees feel that they have a voice and they can speak to people at different levels of the company, they'll be able to sort of share values with one another and create a more holistic environment and a stronger culture as well. So I think in addition to the people at the top sharing values and setting a good example, they should also make themselves available to employees across the board to sort of answer questions and make employees feel like they have a say in what the company is and what that organizational behavior looks like.
Fantastic. And I wondered as well, so again, please do send your questions in. But while we're waiting for other questions, I just wondered, how you'd settled in the UK, and what LSE as a university did, or what services it has to help you as an international student settle in.
Yeah. So settling in, I think it wasn't as hard of a transition for me as it probably is for some other people, because I was coming from New York, which I think is not too different of an environment in terms of culture shock. Definitely different cities, but I think I'd gone through being in an incredibly hectic real estate market before. I'd dealt with a lot of the challenges that come with navigating a big city and all the inconveniences that come with that. But LSE was really helpful in terms of just making sure that I had the resources that I needed if I needed help. They have a visa office that answers any possible question that you could have. So if I was ever confused about what I could do or the visa process, then that office was really, really helpful. And I think one thing that's been a little bit challenging to settle into is the weather, admittedly. But other than that, I think LSE has made it pretty easy to settle in. Welcome Week was definitely helpful in terms of helping us meet people, and they give us a lot of opportunities to go to events and things like that where we can meet people and build sort of a community and good peer relationships. So in addition to that, I think LSE also, one thing that I needed when I came to London was a part-time job, just, to stay afloat. And LSE was really helpful in terms of, there were definitely part-time opportunities in their career website. But I think more importantly, if you seek it out, you'll find some really great opportunities. So for example, as was mentioned at the beginning, I'm part of a program called LSE Changemakers, which is a research program that LSE offers. It's paid research, and you're able to actually research things within LSE. So you're researching the students and professors. And I was just sort of looking for different part-time opportunities at LSE and came across it. And it ended up being such a great opportunity because it's both a paid part-time job and it's relevant research to what I want to do when I graduate. So some things they'll definitely just show you or are easily available, but other things just you look for. But if you're willing to sort of take the time to look for things, you'll find a lot of things that you didn't expect.
Fantastic. So we've got a couple more questions that have come through now. So Frida asks, do you believe that nowadays there are generational mindsets that act like barriers, not only for this behaviour to improve? Sorry, let me just have a... Okay, sorry, it's a long question. So, do you believe that there are generational mindsets that act like barriers, I'm guessing, against kind of behavioural change, which could kind of act against or for organisational change? And do you think that companies understand their employees and find ways to remain attractive to them?
Yeah, so the way that I'm interpreting this question is that there's sort of challenges in generational mindset, so older employees and younger employees, for changing organizational behaviors and cultures. But at the same time, with those generational gaps, you need to make every employee sort of feel included and like their generation isn't being excluded from the culture. And I think that that's definitely a challenge. I've worked in the two companies I worked at. One of them was, much more mixed age. At JP Morgan, there were people who were in every age group, and I think they did have different mindsets. I found that older employees, and this is a sweeping generalization, it is absolutely not true across the board. But I think oftentimes people who've been at a company for a long time are a bit more resistant to change. And that can be a challenge because in most modern workplaces, things are changing so quickly, especially in the financial services sector. So I think it is definitely a challenge to make sure that the employees who are more legacy employees aren't sort of scared off and still feel like they're a part of the culture, while being able to facilitate the change that is necessary to be competitive and innovative in the modern economy. But also making sure that it's attractive to the older and the younger employees. And I think a lot of that just has to do with having a culture of constant change and reskilling. I think it's important to have employees feel like they are kept up to date, and that they're given the tools and skills that they need to stay modern. Because I think for more legacy employees who've been doing the same thing for a long time, change is that much scarier. So if we make change the norm instead of it being this new and exceptional thing, I think it will, in the long run, definitely solve some of those issues. And I think as companies are becoming much more adaptive and agile, it'll definitely help with that in the future.
Fantastic. And then, so the next question we've got, excuse me, got quite a few more questions that have come through now. So an anonymous attendee has asked, what advice would you give to any business to be better gender aware within their human resources area?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. And I think diversity and inclusion in hiring practices is just one piece of the puzzle. A lot more companies are starting to invest more in these diversity and inclusion initiatives, and that's great, and is a step in the right direction. But I think in terms of being more gender aware, it's also about fostering a culture that isn't sort of just focused on one type of employee. I know especially in the technology sector, and I'm sure in certain pockets of financial services as well, there's a very masculine culture. And I think even though they might hire plenty of female employees, they're sort of excluded from a lot of cultural events. So maybe they'll have like a basketball league that's all male employees, or just little things like that that they don't realize can impact a woman's mobility. So I think HR should be more gender aware in terms of fostering a culture that is as inclusive as possible, and making sure that teams are sort of adhering to that culture, because hiring is just one step. But it's important to make women feel like they have the same opportunities as their male employees, that they can build the same relationships as them, and that they can be as much a part of the culture as anybody else.
Fantastic. And Alessandra Torres has a question that's kind of related as well. So in your work experience, what is the percentage of participation of women in leadership in the companies that you've joined?
I wish I had a better answer, like a more positive answer for this, but in both companies that I've worked at full time, there has been a huge lack of women in leadership positions, possibly because one was financial services and one was technology, and both of those fields are definitely fairly male dominated. At JP Morgan, they do have a female CFO, and the head of HR is also a woman, but other than that, the entire leadership team is male. In the trade desk, the entire leadership team was male as well, with the exception of the head of marketing and the head of HR. So, I wish that I could tell you that there was more women in leadership positions now, but I think it's going to be our generation where we start seeing more women in those top leadership positions. And I think a lot of it is also sort of creating an environment where those women who are higher up now provide mentorship and opportunities for younger women who are earlier in their careers. But I think we've got a long way to go, to be honest.
Yeah, certainly it's what the stats seem to say, and a lot of experience.
Yeah, and one thing to sort of add on to that, it's just something interesting that I learned in one of my courses as well. Companies tend to hire female CEOs when they're doing poorly. So I think that kind of takes us back a little bit, because you have Yahoo as an example. When things start going downhill for a company, they kind of are more inclined to hire women in leadership positions to clean up the mess. But that makes it look like they're not doing a good job, even though they just been put in an impossible situation. So, that's another challenge that women face as well.
That's so interesting. Is there anything else any other kind of, I don't know, through your studies, or have you come across, really great practice in businesses that you might have studied, where you can see where actually they're really getting it right in terms of gender?
Let's see. So I think, businesses that are getting it right in terms of gender. It's hard to say. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I think there's definitely a lot of sort of supporting evidence that diversity is good for teams, cultural diversity. And I think that's definitely sort of pro in terms of encouraging companies to be more gender inclusive. Most of my courses haven't as much focus specifically on how to make things sort of which companies are doing it right in terms of gender, because I think there are so few historically that have been doing it right. But we have learned some strategies for making things more accessible for women, and things that include implicit bias training and making sure that people are aware of some of the biases that are against women so that they can work towards solving them. But unfortunately, there aren't a lot of examples of companies that have done it right, because we're only just starting to move in the right direction.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Great to hear your experience and what you've learned as well. So next question is a little bit different, from El Trudeau, who asks, and actually I'd like you to answer this, Alison, and then maybe also get Phil and Sarah to also share their input. So the question is, how can a US student prepare herself to have a strong application for LSE?
Yeah, so other than the obvious things like trying to do the best that you can do in your undergraduate career, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it does seem like UK schools are a little bit more grade focused than US schools are in terms of admissions. But other than that, I mean, personally, I think having worked for a few years before getting my master's was a huge asset for me. It helped me prepare an application that showed that I had experience and really knew what I wanted to do. And I think even if you don't have work experience, which I would recommend if you have the opportunity, I think it's important to show that you are passionate about something and that you will use your LSE education for a greater purpose, and that you have some kind of drive and direction beyond just, I want to go to school, and that you have some specific passion and drive.
Great, and I wonder if Phil and Sarah, whether you'd be able to, also give some tips from an applications point of view, on how students can prepare themselves for a strong application. You're on mute at the moment, so you'll need to unmute yourselves. Ooh. Or not?
I guess I covered it.
Okay, maybe we can come back to them later. So there is, I've got another question for the meantime. So actually, this is quite an interesting question. So anonymous attendee asks, so they mentioned that in the beginning when I was introducing you, I mentioned that you practice Muay Thai, and they asked, could you tell us a little bit more about your experience being abroad outside of academics?
Yeah, so as I said, prior to 2019, I had never spent more than 2 weeks outside of, the close vicinity of my hometown. So this summer was the first time that I lived abroad, and I lived in Thailand at a training camp. So that was my first experience living abroad. And I think it actually really helped me prepare for moving to the UK, because it was the first time I was sort of put into a very different culture in an environment where I had a very strict routine. And it definitely set me up for success in school in the UK. But my experience there had some similarities in that while most of the people I met were Thai, a lot of people at my training camp were from different places. Like one of my friends was Finnish, another was from Réunion, which is an island off Africa, a French island. Another was from Benin. So there were people from all over the place at this camp. And we were all sort of there for the same reasons, and we were all working on the same things. And even though there were a lot of cultural differences, our common goal made us a very close-knit community. And that was just doing Muay Thai and getting better at it and fighting. And I think that kind of reflects the LSE experience in a lot of ways, just having people from a lot of different places and cultures with different mindsets come together for a common goal or for similar goals. So it was a really good experience. And if you can get the opportunity, I would definitely recommend spending some time abroad just to, see what it's like to live in a very different place.
Brilliant. So that was for the time being. That's all the questions that we've got. Please, everyone, don't be shy. And yeah, I don't know where Phil or Sarah. You, I think we might have lost them. But again, if anyone's got any questions as well for Phil or Sarah in the admissions team, we will be sharing both the recording of this session as well as contact details for the team at LSE. So if you did have any questions, so I think Phil should be able to come online now and answer the question. So hi Phil, so the question was, how can a student prepare themselves to have a strong application for LSE?
Okay, thank you. So I'll break this down into both undergraduate and graduate. So if you're looking to apply to an undergraduate degree at LSE, LSE, as all UK universities, you have to make an application via UCAS. So it's just one form on there. And you'd have to submit an academic reference. You'd have to meet the minimum entry requirements where you put your predicted grades on there. And perhaps the most important part is the personal statement. This is where you've got to put across the reasons why you're applying for the particular program. You get to choose up to 5 universities, and the best advice would be to choose your program of study first and then make a personal statement about that subject, because each university will get to see your one personal statement, that one area. So we'd advise you to look into that and to do a cohesive personal statement that can be read about the subject that will go to all 5 universities. If you're looking to apply to graduate, again, this is reasonably straightforward. But the difference is there's not a central body as there is at undergraduate level. So you'd apply directly to LSE via the graduate admissions portal. You'd list, as you'd imagine, your academic achievements, whether that's predicted or achieved grades. You'd also submit a statement of academic purpose, where very similar to the personal statement, where you'd submit the reasons why you'd like to study that particular program, explaining what it is that's drawn you and attracted to it. And you'd also have to supply 2 academic references as well. That would be someone from your most recent studies, and then we'd also like to see a CV, just to kind of give the admission selectors an idea as to what it is that you've done in your past. And that's the very basic way of applying to LSE.
Fabulous. And actually, so a follow-up question from that is saying, what about applications for PhD or doctoral degree programs?
Yes, that's exactly the same as the graduate application system. I should have said that the graduate one covers taught masters and research programs as well. So it's exactly the same. You'd make an application directly to LSE. The only difference would be for PhD students, you would also submit a thesis, a mini thesis rather, as to why you'd like to study that particular program. You would submit that, but it would be at the same time.
Super, great, thanks very much. Hopefully that answered your application questions. Now I've got another question for Allison. So Maritza asks, what's your favourite place or activity in the UK?
Ooh, that's a tough question. There's a lot of good stuff here. London has a lot of awesome things to do. Some great comedy clubs, theater. I love my neighborhood in Southwest London, which is Brixton. So there's tons of fun clubs and bars and things around. Not that I'm, condoning that behavior, but if that's your thing, there's opportunities. One thing that was very unique in the UK that I went to that I found just delightful, in the northern UK, because I've done a bit of traveling in the country, there's this thing called Beamish, and it's a living museum. So it's basically a bunch of people who are historical reenactors. So it's this massive village full of old-timey buildings. They've got an old-timey dentist, they've got a coal mine, all kinds of things. And you can go in and talk to these historical reenactors and learn all about what that specific trade was like in the time period that they're playing. So that's definitely something that I've never seen anywhere else that is just a silly, fun thing to do in the UK.
Super. I've not heard of that. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's very fun and very ridiculous.
Super. So I think for now that's the questions. We've not got any other questions at the moment. We have got potentially up to 10 more minutes with Allison and Phil. So again, don't be shy. This is your chance to ask any questions you might have. And just while we're waiting to see if any other questions come in, I don't know whether either Allison or Phil, you have anything that you feel you haven't covered that you would like to share today?
I think one thing that I would like to cover, because it's something that's very different than my experience as an undergraduate. I think if you're going into a postgraduate program at LSE, I can't speak for undergraduates. I think a lot of what you need to be mindful of is being sort of self-motivated and self-driven. I think in a lot of graduate programs, there's a lot less hand-holding than there is in undergraduate programs. So I think you kind of need to take it upon yourself to pursue opportunities on your own time and seek them out, because they're not just going to be presented to you. So that's something to sort of be mindful of, but it's a good and, can be challenging, but it's good because it sort of forces you to be very self-driven and entrepreneurial and look for opportunities. And I think that's a valuable life skill to have. But I think your peer network will probably be a huge asset to you as well. But there's not much hand-holding done at the postgraduate level. So just something to sort of be prepared for. And that might be the UK system as a whole, but I think it's pretty common in postgraduate institutions as well.
Great, thanks very much. And we've got a question that's coming from Maritza, who asks whether you got any scholarships when you were applying for your program.
So I actually did not end up, I ended up applying too late for the scholarship deadlines, but there are a lot of scholarships that you can apply for. You do need to complete the application process earlier if you want to be eligible for them. So I think a lot of them close in January or around that time period, but Phil would have a better idea. But if you look at the LSE website, there's a huge list of different scholarships that you can apply to through the school. And if you apply to your program early enough, you'll also be eligible for those scholarship programs. So I recommend just trying to apply early and applying to as many programs as you're eligible for, because I do have friends who are who have scholarships that they got before they came to LSE.
Fantastic. And Phil, I don't know whether you had anything else to add on to the scholarship conversation, or whether the advice is to go. It sounds like there's a lot of different scholarships available, so the best thing might be to go to that webpage, and again we can make sure that we share that link when we share the video recording.
Just to chip in there, in terms of scholarships, LSE does have scholarships at both undergraduate and graduate level, and you can apply for them once you've made an application. And we'd always advise students to have a look online to see what's available, and then to make an application. And if you apply for one scholarship, then you'll be eligible for anything else that comes on throughout the year as well. So you don't have to make multiple applications for various pots. If you make one application, then it covers you for all scholarships that you may be eligible for. And as you can imagine, things come on throughout the course of the year as well.
Brilliant. That's a great tip. Fantastic. So again, we've got no more questions at the moment, and we are coming close to our time today. Probably got chance for one more question. So if anyone does have a burning question they'd like to ask, then now's your time. Get the question in quick. And of course as well, if you'd like to speak out loud, then you can just raise your hand. And sorry, I should have mentioned this earlier, but if you raise your hand, then I can unmute you and you can talk directly to Allison or Phil. But it's been great. I had lots of fantastic questions. So thank you all very much for your participation.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And I can't recommend studying in the UK enough if you get the opportunity. there really is nothing like it. It's such an incredible, diverse international place. Not to mention you have so much of Europe so close to you that you can travel around quite a bit. But I've had such a great experience at LSE so far, and definitely recommend it to anyone who's interested and looking into undergrad or postgraduate programs.
Fantastic. So someone saying, thank you very much for your perspective. She said, thank you very much. Great chat. And yeah, good job on today's presentation. So I think if that's, yeah, I think that people are saying thank you. So I think we're probably ready to draw a close to the presentation today. So I just want to again thank you, Alison, so much for your time. It's been fantastic to hear from you, and yeah, good luck with the rest of your studies. And thanks to everybody for joining us. Thank you, Phil, for coming on the line as well and sharing. Oh, sorry, car horns in the background. And yeah, just to let everyone know, so this is our penultimate, this was our penultimate presentation as part of our Outstanding Women series. We've got one more session tomorrow in which we're looking at environmental scientists. We're talking with an environmental scientist studying in the UK. So please do join us for that. And yeah, I don't know if Alison or Phil, you've got anything to say just before we close up.
No, I think that's about it. Thanks so much. And feel free to connect me on LinkedIn if you ever want to chat or have any questions.
Fantastic. Yeah, I know we'll be sharing the link and contact details, link to the video and contact details in due course. So I think without further ado, thank you very much everybody for participating, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much. Have a great night.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you.